I'm standing in the marble foyer of the mansion that was supposed to be mine, watching my brother's face drain of color as he realizes who just walked through his front door. Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the world you're tuning in from. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do me a huge favor and smash it, because today's story is going to leave you absolutely speechless about the power of resilience and the price of cruelty. 10 years ago, Vincent Stark kicked me out of this very house while I was 6 months pregnant, alone, and grieving our dead parents. He stole my inheritance, destroyed my reputation, and left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a baby growing inside me. Today, I own the companies that are systematically dismantling his empire. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because what Vincent did to me that night would have broken most people. Instead, it forged me into something he never saw coming. The day our parents died in that car crash, I was 23 and stupid enough to believe family meant something. Vincent was 28 and already calculating how to erase me from their will. While I sobbed over their caskets, he was meeting with lawyers. While I planned their funeral, he was planning my destruction. See, Vincent had spent our entire childhood seething with jealousy that cut so deep it poisoned everything he touched. Our parents adored me, not because I tried to steal their love, but because I genuinely cared about people. I brought home stray animals, I helped elderly neighbors with groceries, I tutored struggling classmates for free. Vincent brought home perfect grades and hollow achievements that impressed everyone but touched no one's heart. He was the heir apparent, the firstborn son, the one groomed to take over our father's business empire. But he couldn't stand that our parents' eyes lit up when I walked into a room. He couldn't bear that I made them laugh, made them proud in ways his calculated successes never could. So when they died and left him in control of everything, Vincent saw his chance to finally have what he believed I'd stolen from him, their undivided love and attention, even if it was too late for them to give it. The pregnancy was Vincent's perfect excuse to destroy me completely. The father was a man named James who disappeared the moment I told him I was carrying his child. No last name, no forwarding address, no trace. Just gone, like he'd never existed. I was heartbroken, terrified, and completely alone, exactly the kind of vulnerable that Vincent had been waiting for his entire life. That night, 6 months pregnant and still wearing black from our parents' funeral, I knocked on Vincent's door hoping my big brother would help me figure out how to raise a child alone. Instead, he opened that door with a smile that should have warned me I was about to meet the devil. Well, well, he said, eyes glittering with something that made my skin crawl. If it isn't little Charlotte with her bastard child, coming to beg for handouts. I actually laughed because I thought he was making some twisted joke. Vincent, I just need help understanding the trust fund paperwork. Mom and Dad said there would be money for both of us when they. There is no both of us, he cut me off, voice dropping to a whisper that felt like ice water in my veins. There's me, and there's the family embarrassment who got knocked up by a ghost. That's when I realized this wasn't my brother anymore. This was a stranger wearing Vincent's face, and he'd been hiding behind that mask our entire lives. What happened next was so brutal, so calculated, so cruel that for years I convinced myself it had to be a nightmare. But nightmares don't leave you homeless and penniless at 6 months pregnant. Vincent had already rewritten our parents' will. He'd moved their assets into accounts I couldn't touch. He'd told the lawyers I was unstable, irresponsible, a liability to the family name. And now he was using my pregnancy as his final weapon. Get out, he said, standing in the doorway like a king addressing a peasant. Take your shame and your bastard and get out of my house. You'll get nothing from this family because you've earned nothing but disgrace. I begged. God help me, I actually got down on my knees and begged my own brother not to abandon me when I needed family most. He stepped over me like I was garbage and went back inside. That night, I slept in my car in a gas station parking lot, my pregnant belly pressed against the steering wheel, sobbing until I had no tears left. But here's what Vincent never understood about the sister he tried to erase. Will Vincent's cruelty finally catch up to him? What did Charlotte build in those 10 years of silence? And why is she standing in his mansion tonight with that terrifying smile on her face? I never told anyone about that first night sleeping in my car, but it taught me something about myself that Vincent never knew existed. I don't break, I bend until I'm strong enough to snap back. The next morning, I drove to the only place I could think of, a small diner on the outskirts of town where our old housekeeper, Maria Santos, had started working after our parents died. Maria had raised me when my parents were too busy building their empire, and she was the closest thing to a mother I had left. When I walked into that diner at 6 a.m., still wearing yesterday's funeral dress with mascara stains down my cheeks, Maria took one look at me and knew exactly what Vincent had done. Mija, she whispered, wrapping her weathered arms around me. That boy's heart turned to stone the day he realized love can't be inherited. Maria didn't have much, a tiny apartment above the diner, barely enough to cover her own bills. But she had something Vincent's billions couldn't buy, the ability to see people's worth beyond their bank accounts. She gave me her couch, her last $20, and most importantly, she gave me the truth about my parents that Vincent had been hiding. "Your mother came to see me the week before they died," Maria said, brewing tea in her cramped kitchen while I curled up with a blanket that smelled like cinnamon and safety. She was worried about Vincent, about how angry he'd become. She wanted to change the will to make sure you were protected, but your father kept saying Vincent would do right by family. My parents had trusted Vincent to take care of me. They believed their son's resentment was just sibling rivalry that would fade with maturity. They died never knowing they'd left me at the mercy of someone who saw me as his enemy. That's when I understood my deepest fear, not poverty, not being a single mother, not even Vincent's cruelty. My terror was that my child would grow up believing they were unwanted, unloved, a burden. Everything Vincent had made me feel, I refused to pass on to my baby. That became my mission, to build a life so full of love and purpose that my child would never doubt their worth. But first, I had to survive. Maria introduced me to Elena Rodriguez, a young lawyer who volunteered at a women's shelter downtown. Elena was brilliant, fierce, and had grown up poor enough to understand that the system wasn't designed for people like us. She looked over the legal papers Vincent had filed and her face went white. "Charlotte, this is masterful," she said, her voice filled with reluctant admiration for Vincent's calculated cruelty. "He's not just stealing your inheritance, he's making it legally impossible for you to challenge him. Every document, every witness statement, every financial record has been altered to paint you as unstable and undeserving." "So I have no legal recourse?" I asked, one hand protectively covering my growing belly. Elena's dark eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I didn't say that. I said Vincent thinks he's untouchable. But men like him always leave breadcrumbs of their arrogance. We just have to be patient enough to collect them." Elena became my first ally in what would eventually become Vincent's downfall. She taught me how the legal system really worked, not the pretty version they teach in law school, but the brutal reality of how power protects power. More importantly, she taught me how to use that system's own rules against the people who thought they were above consequences. But the most important person in my story hadn't even been born yet. At 8 months pregnant, sleeping on Maria's couch and working part-time cleaning offices for cash under the table, I felt my daughter kick for the first time with real force. Not the gentle flutters I'd been feeling for months, but a powerful, deliberate movement that felt like a declaration. "She's going to be a fighter," Maria said, watching my belly ripple with movement. "Like her mama." I named her Isabella Cross, Isabella for beautiful, cross because I decided we would bear our struggles like a cross that makes us stronger, not breaks us. Vincent had tried to erase us from the family name, so we would build our own legacy. When Isabella was born on a snowy February morning, she looked up at me with eyes that held an ancient wisdom, like she already understood the world we were facing together. In that moment, holding my daughter in a charity hospital room with peeling paint and flickering lights, I made her a promise that would reshape both our lives. We're going to build something so beautiful, so powerful, so undeniably ours that the man who threw us away will spend the rest of his life regretting he didn't recognize what he had. Isabella smiled, probably just gas, but I chose to believe she understood. What Vincent never knew was that our father had taught me about business from the time I could walk. While Vincent was learning to charm boardrooms and manipulate shareholders, I was learning to spot opportunities, understand market trends, and most importantly, recognize good people. Dad said I had an intuitive sense for investments that couldn't be taught. Vincent thought that knowledge died with my inheritance. He was wrong. The night I left the hospital with Isabella, Elena met me with an envelope that would change everything. "I've been tracking every move Vincent made after your parents died," she said, eyes shining with anticipation. "He was careless, Charlotte. Arrogant. He left a paper trail of forgery, fraud, and manipulation that could destroy him if the right person ever decided to follow it." "What are you saying?" I asked, shifting Isabella to my other arm. "I'm saying Vincent thinks he won the war by winning the first battle. But you're not just going to survive this, Charlotte. You're going to become the storm that wipes him off the map." That envelope contained copies of documents Vincent thought he'd buried forever, proof that our parents had intended to leave me half of everything, evidence that Vincent had forged their signatures, records of bribes he'd paid to lawyers and officials to make his theft look legal. But Elena gave me something even more valuable than evidence, a plan. "We're going to disappear for a few years," she said. "Let Vincent think he's safe. Let him get comfortable with his stolen empire. Meanwhile, we're going to build our own power base, make our own connections, create our own wealth. And when we're ready, when we're strong enough that he can't possibly fight back, we're going to take everything he stole and show the world who Vincent Stark really is." Looking down at Isabella's sleeping face, I realized Vincent had made a crucial mistake. He thought destroying me would eliminate the threat I represented. Instead, he'd created an enemy with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. But that night, holding my newborn daughter in a borrowed car heading toward an uncertain future, I couldn't have imagined how completely I would transform in the years ahead. 6 months after leaving that hospital with Isabella, I was living in a studio apartment in Chicago, working 3 jobs and attending night classes in business administration. Elena had helped me disappear completely, new social security number, new identity, new life. As far as the world knew, Charlotte Stark had vanished without a trace. But Vincent made one mistake that would ultimately destroy him. He got cocky. I was waitressing at an upscale restaurant downtown when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. 3 businessmen in expensive suits were celebrating at table 12, toasting Vincent's latest acquisition, a tech startup that had developed revolutionary AI software for financial markets. Stark paid pennies for it, one of them laughed, cutting into his steak. The founder had no idea what his own company was worth. Poor bastard's probably kicking himself now that Vincent's licensing the technology for millions. My blood turned to ice. I recognized that story because I'd lived it 3 years ago. Vincent had approached a young programmer named David Allen, convinced him to sell his company for a fraction of its value, then turned around and made a fortune from David's life's work. The same pattern Vincent had used to steal from me, he was using to destroy other people. That night, I called Elena with shaking hands while Isabella slept in her crib. "He's not just a thief," I whispered into the phone. "He's a predator. How many other people has he destroyed?" "Charlotte," Elena's voice was carefully controlled. "I've been waiting for you to be ready to hear this. Vincent hasn't just stolen from you. I've found at least 12 other cases in the past 3 years, small business owners, inventors, even elderly people he's convinced to sign over property. He's built his empire on other people's ruins." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Vincent wasn't just my cruel brother, he was a monster systematically destroying innocent people's lives for profit. "We have to stop him," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "Are you sure you're ready for this war?" Elena asked. "Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. Vincent will try to destroy you completely when he realizes you're alive and fighting back." I looked at Isabella's sleeping face, so peaceful and trusting, and made the decision that would define the next decade of my life. He already destroyed me once. This time, I'm going to make sure he can never hurt anyone again. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Then we're going to need help. And I know exactly where to find it." The next week, Elena arranged a meeting at a small coffee shop near Lake Michigan. She'd been deliberately vague about who we were meeting, just saying it was someone who could help us understand Vincent's business operations from the inside. I arrived early, nervous and exhausted from pulling a double shift the night before. Isabella was with Maria, who'd moved to Chicago to help me with childcare. I sat in the corner booth, wearing my only decent dress and trying not to look like someone whose entire net worth was less than most people's grocery budget. Then he walked in, and my heart stopped. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and the kind of intense green eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested this was a man who could afford anything he wanted but chose simplicity instead. He scanned the room, and when his eyes met mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my parents died, the flutter of genuine attraction mixed with curiosity about who someone really was beneath their surface. "Charlotte," he asked, approaching my table with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something devastating. "Yes," I managed, standing to shake his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and lasted just a moment longer than necessary. "I'm Thomas Anderson," he said, and something about his voice made me want to keep listening. "Elena told me you might be interested in learning about certain business practices that skirt the edge of legality." "That's one way to put it," I said, gesturing for him to sit across from me. Thomas ordered coffee and studied me with those penetrating eyes while we waited for Elena to arrive. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. "You know," he said finally, "Elena didn't tell me much about your situation, but she did mention you have a personal interest in Vincent Stark's business methods." My spine stiffened. "What do you know about Vincent?" Thomas's expression darkened. "I know he destroyed my best friend's company 2 years ago. David Allen, maybe you've heard of him? Vincent convinced David to sell his AI startup for practically nothing, then made millions licensing the technology David had spent 5 years perfecting." I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "You were there. At the restaurant." You were one of the men celebrating Vincent's acquisition. Celebrating? Thomas's laugh was bitter. I was there gathering intelligence. I've been tracking Vincent's predatory business practices for 2 years, documenting every company he's acquired through manipulation and fraud. David's company was just the latest in a long line of victims. Before I could respond, Elena arrived and slid into the booth beside me. I see you two have already started getting acquainted, she said, eyes twinkling with something that made me suspicious. Elena, I said slowly, who exactly is Thomas? Thomas Anderson is an investigative journalist specializing in corporate fraud, Elena replied. He's also the son of Judge Patricia Anderson, who presided over your parents' estate proceedings. And most importantly for our purposes, he's been building a case against Vincent for the past 2 years. I felt the world shift around me. You're a journalist? Former Wall Street financial analyst turned investigative journalist, Thomas corrected. I left finance when I realized how many people like Vincent were using the system to destroy lives for profit. David Allen wasn't just my best friend, he was my college roommate, the smartest person I've ever known, and watching Vincent systematically break him taught me everything I needed to know about predators in expensive suits. And you want to expose Vincent? I asked. I want to destroy him, Thomas said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that made something dangerous flutter in my chest. But I need someone who understands his methods from the inside. Elena says you might be that person. I looked between Elena and Thomas, realizing this wasn't a chance meeting. Elena had been planning this moment, orchestrating it, setting up the alliance that would give us the power to take Vincent down. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Thomas leaned forward, and I caught the scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and something that was purely him. I'm proposing we combine our resources. Your inside knowledge of Vincent's psychology and methods, Elena's legal expertise, and my investigative skills and media connections. Together, we build an airtight case that exposes Vincent's crimes and returns stolen assets to his victims. Including my inheritance? I asked. Especially your inheritance, Thomas said. But Charlotte, you need to understand what you're signing up for. Vincent has billions of dollars, political connections, and a willingness to destroy anyone who threatens him. If we do this, he'll come for all of us with everything he has. I thought about Isabella, sleeping peacefully while I sat in this coffee shop planning her uncle's downfall. I thought about David Allen and all the other victims whose lives Vincent had shattered for profit. I thought about my parents, who'd trusted their son to do right by family. What do you need from me? I asked. Thomas smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. Everything you know about how Vincent thinks, how he operates, how he justifies his actions to himself. You're going to help me get inside his head so completely that we can predict his next move before he makes it. And in return? In return, we're going to give you something Vincent never expected you to have, Thomas said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. We're going to give you the power to take back everything he stole and make sure he never hurts anyone again. Elena was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. So, are we doing this? I looked at Thomas's hand covering mine, thought about Isabella's future, and made the decision that would change all our lives forever. We're doing this, I said. But I have one condition. Name it, Thomas said. When we destroy Vincent, I want him to know it was me. I want him to understand that the sister he threw away came back strong enough to take everything he thought he'd stolen forever. Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Charlotte, by the time we're done with Vincent, he's going to wish he'd never heard your name. But neither of us could have predicted what would happen when Vincent realized his discarded sister was not only alive, but building the foundation of his complete destruction. The next 3 months became a delicate dance between building a life with Isabella and building a case against Vincent. Thomas had rented a small office space downtown where we could work without worrying about surveillance, and most evenings found the three of us hunched over laptops and legal documents while Isabella played quietly in a corner with toys Thomas had started bringing her. She's brilliant, Thomas said one night, watching Isabella stack blocks with an engineering precision that seemed impossible for a 10-month-old. Look at how she's calculating weight distribution. I glanced up from the financial records I'd been analyzing and felt my heart do something complicated. Thomas was sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping Isabella build towers and talking to her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. He'd been doing this for weeks, bringing her books, teaching her simple words, making her laugh with silly faces during our long work sessions. You don't have to entertain her, I said softly. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Thomas looked up at me with those intense green eyes that had started appearing in my dreams. Charlotte, watching you raise Isabella while fighting for justice and working 3 jobs to survive, it's the most impressive thing I've ever witnessed. If helping with her makes this easier for you, then it makes me happy too. Elena cleared her throat pointedly from across the room. Should I leave you two alone, or can we focus on the fact that Vincent just acquired another company under suspicious circumstances? Heat flooded my cheeks, but Thomas just grinned and picked up Isabella, who immediately grabbed for his glasses. What kind of company? I asked, trying to ignore how natural Thomas looked holding my daughter. Medical device startup, Elena said, sliding a folder across the desk. 22-year-old inventor named Sarah Chen. She created a revolutionary prosthetic limb design that could change millions of lives, but her family needed immediate cash for her father's cancer treatment. I felt the familiar rage building in my chest as I read Sarah's story. Vincent had approached her during her most vulnerable moment, when desperation made her easy to manipulate. He'd offered enough money to cover her father's medical bills in exchange for full rights to her technology, knowing she was too young and scared to understand what she was signing away. Her technology is now worth an estimated $40 million, Thomas said, bouncing Isabella gently while she babbled at him. Vincent paid her $50,000. We have to help her, I said immediately. Charlotte. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. We can't save everyone Vincent has hurt. If we start reaching out to his victims now, it'll tip him off that someone is building a case against him. So we just let him keep destroying lives while we gather evidence? Thomas set Isabella in her playpen and moved to sit beside me on the small couch. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, smell that intoxicating combination of soap and something uniquely him. We document everything, he said. Every victim, every stolen innovation, every fraudulent contract. When we finally move against Vincent, we'll have enough evidence to help all of them get justice. But if we act too soon, he'll just disappear the evidence and destroy more people to cover his tracks. I knew he was right, but the frustration was eating me alive. Every day we waited was another day Vincent might hurt someone else, another family he could destroy for profit. How do you stand it? I asked Thomas. Watching him get away with this while we build our case? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. My younger sister died 3 years ago in a car accident. She was driving to meet with a business investor who'd promised to fund her nonprofit for homeless youth. The investor never showed up, he'd never intended to meet with her at all. He was Vincent Stark, and he'd used her hope as a way to waste her time while he stole her business plan and gave it to a larger organization he controlled. My blood turned to ice. Thomas. She was rushing home that night, devastated and confused about why someone would lie to her about something so important. She hit black ice on a mountain road and died instantly. His voice was steady, but I could see the pain carved into his features. I didn't know about Vincent's involvement until 6 months later, when I found her journals. That's when I started investigating him. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. The contact sent electricity through both of us, but neither pulled away. I'm so sorry, I whispered. Vincent doesn't just steal money or ideas, Thomas continued, intertwining our fingers. He steals hope. He finds people's dreams and turns them into weapons against them. That's why we have to be patient, Charlotte. We get one chance to destroy him completely, and if we miss it, he'll just become more careful about hiding his crimes. I squeezed his hand, understanding now why Thomas's intensity felt so familiar. We were both fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves anymore. Okay, I said. We wait. We build the case properly. But the moment we have enough evidence. The moment we have enough evidence, Vincent Stark's empire burns to the ground, Thomas finished. Elena was watching us with barely contained glee. You two do realize you're falling in love while planning corporate warfare, right? It's either very romantic or deeply disturbing. I dropped Thomas's hand like it was on fire, but he just laughed. Disturbing, he said. Definitely disturbing. But later that night, as Thomas was packing up his laptop to leave, he paused at the door. Charlotte? Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that isn't this office, without case files and evidence folders. My heart did a complicated dance between hope and terror. I don't really have time for dating. Between Isabella and work and this investigation. Not dating, Thomas said quickly. Just dinner. Two people who've been eating takeout and vending machine food for 3 months, having one normal meal together. I looked at Isabella, sleeping peacefully in her car seat, then back at Thomas's hopeful expression. One dinner, I said. But if this complicates our working relationship. It won't, Thomas promised. Scout's honor. Were you actually a scout? No, but I watched a lot of movies about scouts. Despite everything, the stress, the danger, the impossible task we'd undertaken, I laughed. When was the last time someone had made me laugh? That dinner turned into a revelation I hadn't expected. Away from case files and legal documents, Thomas was funny, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in everything about my life. He asked about Isabella's favorite foods, my dreams before Vincent destroyed my family, the books I'd loved as a child. He told me about growing up with a judge for a mother, about learning to see justice as something worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. "Can I ask you something?" he said over dessert we were sharing at a small Italian restaurant that felt like a world away from our usual chaos. "Sure. Do you ever think about what happens after? When Vincent's in prison and Isabella's older and you've reclaimed your inheritance, what do you want your life to look like?" I was quiet for a long moment, twirling pasta around my fork while I tried to imagine a future that didn't revolve around survival and revenge. "I want to build something," I said finally. "Not just wealth, but something that helps people. Maybe a foundation that protects small inventors from people like Vincent. Or a legal aid society for families who can't afford to fight back against corporate bullies." "That sounds perfect for you," Thomas said. "You have this way of seeing people's potential, of believing in what they could become with the right support." "Is that how you see me?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. Thomas reached across the table and touched my hand again, and this time I didn't pull away. "I see you as someone who was thrown away like trash and turned herself into a diamond," he said. "I see strength that should have broken you but made you unbreakable instead. And I see a woman who deserves to have her family's empire back, not for revenge, but because she'll use it to change the world." The intensity in his voice made something flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood the fire that had been forged inside me. But our growing connection was about to face its first real test. The next morning, Elena called me at 6 a.m., her voice tight with panic. "Charlotte, we have a problem. Vincent knows someone is investigating him." My blood turned to ice. "How?" "One of our source documents got flagged in a legal database. Vincent's lawyers ran a search and found evidence that someone's been accessing sealed records from his business acquisitions." "Does he know it's me?" "Not yet. But he's hired private investigators to find out who's building a case against him. They're going to trace those records back to us eventually." I sank into my kitchen chair, Isabella babbling happily in her high chair while my world tilted off its axis. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "Maybe a week before they connect the dots. Vincent's offering a $100,000 reward for information about who's been investigating his business practices." $100,000. More money than most of Vincent's victims had ever seen. More than enough to tempt someone who knew what we were doing to sell us out. "We need to accelerate our timeline," I said. "Charlotte, we're nowhere near ready. We have evidence of fraud, but not enough to guarantee conviction. If we move too fast, Vincent walks free and destroys everything we've built." I looked at Isabella, my beautiful daughter who was supposed to grow up safe and protected, and realized Vincent's reach might be longer than we'd calculated. "Then we'd better work faster," I said. "Because if Vincent figures out I'm alive before we're ready to take him down, none of us are safe." That night, Thomas arrived at the office with grim news of his own. "I ran a background check on everyone who has access to our investigation files," he said, spreading photos across the desk. "Elena, you need to see this." Elena's face went white as she stared at the documents Thomas had compiled. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Your friend Maria Santos," Thomas said carefully, "received a $50,000 deposit into her bank account yesterday. The transfer came from a shell company registered to Vincent's legal team." The words hit me like a physical blow. Maria, who'd raised me, who'd given me shelter when I was pregnant and homeless, who'd moved to Chicago to help with Isabella. "No," I whispered. "There has to be another explanation." "Charlotte," Elena said gently, "Maria has access to our files. She knows where we meet, what we're investigating, even Isabella's real identity. If she told Vincent you were alive..." I couldn't finish the thought. If Vincent knew I was alive, knew about Isabella, knew we were building a case against him. "We have to assume he knows everything," Thomas said. "Which means we have maybe 48 hours before Vincent makes his countermove." "What kind of countermove?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Thomas and Elena exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "Charlotte," Thomas said quietly, "men like Vincent don't just defend themselves when they're cornered. They attack. And now that he knows you're alive with a daughter he never knew existed. He's going to come for Isabella," I finished, the words barely a whisper. Isabella chose that moment to laugh at something on the children's show playing softly in the background, completely unaware that her world was about to become a battlefield. "We need to disappear," Elena said. "Tonight. New identities, new city, start over somewhere Vincent can't find us." "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "I'm not running anymore. Vincent destroyed my life once, and I spent 3 years building something better. I won't let him make me run again. Charlotte, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I cut Thomas off. Vincent thinks he holds all the cards because he's rich and connected and ruthless. But he doesn't know who I've become in the years since he threw me away. And he definitely doesn't know that I'm not the scared, grieving girl he kicked out of his house anymore. Thomas stared at me with something that looked like admiration mixed with terror. What are you saying? I'm saying we don't wait for Vincent to make his move, I said, feeling a cold clarity settle over me like armor. We force his hand. We make him react to us instead of the other way around. That's incredibly dangerous, Elena warned. Everything about this is dangerous, I replied. But Vincent made one crucial mistake when he decided to come for my daughter. He reminded me exactly why I can never let him win. I picked up Isabella, who immediately snuggled against my shoulder with the trust that only children possess. So what's the plan? Thomas asked. I looked at him, this man who'd become so much more than an ally, who'd helped me remember that not everyone in the world was trying to hurt me, and made a decision that would change everything. We're going to do something Vincent will never expect from the sister he discarded, I said. We're going to walk straight into his world and remind him exactly what he threw away. But first, I had to decide if I was brave enough to trust Thomas with the most dangerous part of the plan, and with the heart I'd forgotten I still had. The plan was simple: walk into Vincent's annual charity gala as Charlotte Stark, very much alive, very much unbroken, and force him to make a mistake in front of 500 of the city's most powerful people. What I didn't expect was to uncover the truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family's death. Thomas had used his media connections to get us press credentials for the event. Elena would monitor from the van outside, ready to record any confession we could provoke. Isabella was safely hidden with Thomas's mother, Judge Anderson, who'd agreed to protect her while we walked into Vincent's domain. You don't have to do this, Thomas said for the 10th time as we sat in his car outside the Grand Hotel where Vincent's gala was taking place. We can still find another way. I adjusted the elegant black dress Elena had helped me choose, sophisticated, expensive-looking, but bought from a consignment shop with our last $100. My hair was styled in a sleek updo that made me look older, more polished than the broken girl Vincent had thrown away. He needs to see who I became, I said, checking my reflection in the visor mirror. Vincent thinks he destroyed me. Tonight, he learns that he created his own destruction instead. Thomas reached over and took my hand, and the familiar electricity passed between us. Over the past week, as we'd planned this confrontation, something had shifted between us. The professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, more personal, more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. Charlotte, there's something I need to tell you before we go in there, Thomas said, his voice tight with tension. What is it? He was quiet for so long I started to worry. Thomas, I've been investigating Vincent longer than I told you, he said finally. 2 years longer. Ever since my sister died, I've been obsessed with uncovering every detail of his business practices, his personal life, his history. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What did you find? Thomas pulled out a manila folder I'd never seen before and handed it to me with shaking hands. Charlotte, I don't think your parents' car accident was an accident. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Vincent was in serious financial trouble 6 months before they died, Thomas said, his voice carefully controlled. The business was hemorrhaging money due to some bad investments he'd made without telling your father. He needed access to the family trust immediately or everything would have collapsed. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, financial records, and what looked like surveillance reports. Your parents were planning to remove Vincent from his position as heir, Thomas continued. Your father had discovered Vincent's financial misconduct and was meeting with lawyers to restructure the entire family trust. Vincent would have been left with nothing. The photographs showed my parents entering a law office 3 days before they died. Timestamps, dates, legal documents that proved they'd been moving to cut Vincent out of the inheritance entirely. They were protecting you, I whispered, staring at a document that would have made me the sole beneficiary of the family fortune. Vincent hired a private investigator to follow them, Thomas said. The same investigator who sent me these files anonymously last week. He's been carrying the guilt for 3 years, and when he heard someone was building a case against Vincent, he decided to come forward. You're saying Vincent killed our parents for money? I'm saying Vincent arranged for them to have an accident on a mountain road during a snowstorm, on the same night they were supposed to sign documents that would have destroyed him financially. The air in the car felt too thin to breathe. Everything I'd believed about my parents' death, about Vincent's cruelty being born from jealousy, about my own survival being a matter of luck, it was all a lie. Vincent hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd murdered our parents to get it. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because I was afraid you'd want immediate revenge instead of justice, Thomas said. And because I was afraid you'd try to handle this alone and get yourself killed. I stared at the evidence in my hands, proof that Vincent was not just a thief, but a murderer who'd orchestrated the death of the two people I'd loved most in the world. Charlotte. Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. Say something. Maria didn't betray us, I said, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Vincent's known I was alive this whole time. He's been monitoring me, watching me struggle, letting me think I was building a case against him while he planned, what? To kill me and Isabella too? We think so. The $50,000 in Maria's account was planted there to make us suspicious of her, to isolate you from your support system. Vincent wanted you to feel alone and paranoid before he made his final move. I closed the folder and looked at Thomas, this man who'd risked everything to find the truth, who'd fallen in love with a woman carrying enough vengeance to destroy them both. How long have you known? I asked. About your parents? 2 weeks. About being in love with you. Thomas's smile was sad and beautiful and terrified. Probably since that first day in the coffee shop when you looked at me like you were deciding whether I was worth trusting. The confession hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn down. 6 months ago, I'd believed I was too broken, too focused on survival and revenge, to ever let someone close enough to hurt me. But Thomas had slipped past my defenses by being exactly what I needed, a partner in seeking justice, a gentle presence in Isabella's life, a man who saw strength instead of damage when he looked at me. Thomas, I said, reaching up to touch his face. I'm in love with you too. And I'm terrified that what we're about to do will get you killed. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes like he was memorizing the feel of my hands on his skin. Vincent's already killed everyone I care most about, he said. My sister, your parents, countless other people whose only crime was standing in his way. I'm not losing you too. Then we end this tonight, I said, feeling something crystallize inside me that was harder and sharper than anything Vincent had ever faced. Not just for the inheritance, not even for justice. We end this because men like Vincent only stop destroying lives when someone makes them stop. Thomas kissed me then, soft and desperate and full of everything we might not get to say if Vincent's plan succeeded. When we broke apart, I could see my own determination reflected in his eyes. What's the new plan? He asked. I looked toward the hotel where Vincent was celebrating his stolen success, surrounded by people who thought he was a philanthropist instead of a murderer. Vincent thinks he's been playing chess while I've been struggling to survive, I said. Tonight, he learns that I've been playing chess too. And I've already won. Charlotte, what are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed Thomas a series of text messages I'd been exchanging for the past 2 hours. Remember Sarah Chen? The young inventor whose prosthetic technology Vincent stole? I reached out to her this afternoon. Turns out she's been working on new innovations while saving every email, every contract, every piece of evidence from her dealings with Vincent. Thomas's eyes widened as he read through my phone. She's been building a case against him too? Better. She's been building a network of his victims. 12 inventors, small business owners, and startup founders who've all been quietly gathering evidence for the past 2 years. They've been waiting for someone with the resources and legal knowledge to help them coordinate their attack. How many people are we talking about? 47 victims. Collective damages of over $600 million. And Sarah convinced them to time their coordinated lawsuit for tonight, during Vincent's charity gala, when the media coverage will be maximum and Vincent will be trapped in a room full of witnesses. Thomas stared at me like I'd just revealed I could fly. You've been planning this coordinated attack while pretending to build a case for just your own situation? Vincent taught me something important when he threw me out, I said. Predators like him rely on their victims being isolated and ashamed. But when the victims start talking to each other, when they realize they're part of a pattern instead of individual failures, they become powerful enough to fight back, Thomas finished. Sarah's group has been waiting for someone with media connections to help them tell their story, I continued. Elena's been coordinating with the legal team representing all 47 victims. And you, my brilliant investigative journalist, are about to break the biggest corporate fraud story of the decade. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing the scope of what I'd orchestrated. Charlotte, this isn't just taking Vincent down. This is dismantling his entire empire and sending him to prison for the rest of his life. Good, I said. Because Vincent made one crucial error when he decided to murder my parents and steal my inheritance. What's that? I checked my reflection one more time, adjusted my dress, and prepared to walk into the battle that would define the rest of my life. He underestimated what his discarded little sister would become when she had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As we walked toward the hotel entrance, Thomas took my hand one more time. After tonight, when Vincent's finished and the inheritance is returned and justice is served, what happens to us? He asked. I squeezed his fingers, thinking about Isabella sleeping safely at Judge Anderson's house, about the life I wanted to build beyond survival and revenge. After tonight, we get to find out what love looks like when it doesn't have to compete with the need for justice, I said. But neither of us could have predicted that Vincent had been planning his own surprise for this evening, one that would put everything we'd built, and everyone we cared about, in mortal danger. The ballroom was exactly what I expected from Vincent, opulent, ostentatious, designed to impress rather than inspire. Crystal chandeliers caught the light from hundreds of candles, and the city's elite mingled beneath oil paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. But something was wrong. The moment we walked through the doors, I felt it, the sensation of walking into a trap that had been carefully laid and perfectly disguised. Too many eyes turned toward us, too many whispered conversations stopped mid-sentence, too many knowing smiles from strangers who shouldn't have recognized me. Charlotte, Thomas murmured, his hand tightening on mine. This doesn't feel right. That's when I saw him. Vincent stood at the center of the room like a king holding court, devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. But his eyes were fixed on me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, not surprise, but satisfaction. He'd been expecting me. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent's voice carried easily across the crowded ballroom as a microphone was pressed into his hand. If I could have your attention for a moment, I'd like to share a wonderful surprise with all of you. The crowd turned toward him, champagne glasses raised expectantly. Thomas and I were trapped in the middle of the room, too far from any exit to escape without causing a scene. Many of you know the tragic story of my family, Vincent continued, his voice carrying just the right note of practiced grief. How I lost both my beloved parents and my dear sister Charlotte in the span of a few terrible months 3 years ago. My blood turned to ice. He was rewriting history in real time, in front of 500 witnesses. Charlotte was struggling with severe mental health issues after our parents' death, Vincent said, his eyes never leaving mine. She disappeared one night, and despite extensive searches and investigations, we never found her. I've spent 3 years believing she was dead. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. I could see the narrative Vincent was constructing, the concerned brother, the unstable sister, the tragic family loss. But tonight, Vincent's smile was radiant and terrible. I've learned that Charlotte is alive. Not only alive, but here with us this evening. A spotlight suddenly blazed down on Thomas and me, blinding and exposing. The crowd turned as one, 500 pairs of eyes studying me with curiosity, pity, and speculation. Charlotte, my dear sister, Vincent said, moving through the crowd toward us with arms outstretched. How wonderful that you've finally come home. I stood frozen as Vincent approached, his public persona of loving concern so perfectly crafted that even I almost believed it. This was exactly what he'd planned, to control the narrative before I could expose him, to make me look like the unstable sister returning to disrupt her successful brother's life. Vincent, I managed, my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my throat. You look wonderful, he said, embracing me in front of the cameras that had suddenly appeared. Though I have to say, I'm surprised you chose tonight to reveal yourself. My security team has been tracking your rather concerning activities over the past few months. My heart stopped. What activities? Vincent's smile never wavered, but his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. Did you really think I didn't know about your little investigation? Your journalist boyfriend? Your coordinated lawsuit that was supposed to destroy me tonight? The room tilted around me. How did you? Sarah Chen sends her regrets, Vincent continued in that same deadly whisper. Unfortunately, she and several of your other co-conspirators have been arrested on charges of corporate espionage and extortion. Seems they were caught attempting to blackmail me with forged documents. No. This couldn't be happening. Sarah and the other victims were supposed to be filing their coordinated lawsuit at this exact moment. Elena should have been coordinating with their legal team. Everything we'd planned, everything we'd built. Don't look so shocked, dear sister, Vincent said, stepping back but keeping his hands on my shoulders in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a cage. Did you really think I'd let you destroy everything I've worked for? That's when I saw Elena. She was standing near the back of the room, but instead of looking concerned or angry, she was smiling. Actually smiling, as if watching Vincent dismantle me publicly was exactly what she'd hoped to see. Elena? I called out, my voice cracking. She moved closer, and I could see something in her expression that made my blood freeze, the same satisfied look Vincent wore. I'm sorry, Charlotte, Elena said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. I've been trying to help you get the psychiatric care you need, but you refuse to listen. Vincent and I have been working together for months to document your increasingly erratic behavior. The words hit me like physical blows. Elena, my ally, my friend, the woman who'd helped me disappear and rebuild my life, had been working with Vincent all along. The investigation files, the evidence against Vincent, the coordinated lawsuit, I whispered. You gave him everything. Charlotte suffers from severe paranoid delusions, Elena announced to the room, her voice carrying the authority of a legal expert. She's become convinced that her brother stole her inheritance and murdered their parents. We have extensive documentation of her mental decline, including recordings where she threatens violence against Vincent and discusses kidnapping her own child. The crowd gasped. I could hear whispers, see the looks of pity and concern. Vincent had orchestrated this perfectly, making me look like the dangerous, unstable sister while positioning himself as the caring brother trying to get me help. Where's Isabella? I asked Thomas frantically. We have to get to Isabella. Thomas's face had gone white. Charlotte, my mother? Judge Anderson was supposed to be protecting her. Judge Anderson is a close family friend, Vincent said smoothly. She contacted me immediately when you brought a child to her home and claimed Vincent Stark was trying to hurt you both. Naturally, she was concerned about a baby being used in what appeared to be an elaborate delusion. My legs almost gave out. If Vincent had Isabella, if he could claim I was an unfit mother, if Judge Anderson believed his lies. You can't take her from me, I whispered. Charlotte, sweetheart, Vincent's voice was gentle, concerned, perfect for the cameras. Isabella is safe. She's with qualified child protective services while we arrange for you to get the help you clearly need. The room was spinning. Everything we'd built, everyone we'd trusted, every piece of evidence we'd gathered, Vincent had turned it all against us. Worse than that, he'd made it look like I was the villain in my own story. Thomas, I reached for him desperately. Tell them. Tell them about the evidence, about what Vincent really is. But when I turned to Thomas, his face was a mask of confusion and betrayal. Charlotte, he said slowly. Did you lie to me about Isabella's father? What? The question came from nowhere. Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Thomas something that made his expression crumble. Charlotte claimed the father was a mysterious stranger who disappeared, Vincent said. But we have DNA evidence proving that Isabella's father is a man named David Allen, the same David Allen whose company you claim I stole. The same David Allen who's been helping Charlotte orchestrate this entire scheme against me. No, that was impossible. David Allen was Thomas's best friend, the programmer whose company Vincent had destroyed. I'd never even met him. That's not true, I said desperately. David Allen is Thomas's friend. I've never met him in my life. Actually, Thomas said, his voice hollow. David Allen is my real name. Thomas Anderson is the pseudonym I've been using as a journalist. The floor dropped out from under me. Everything, the coffee shop meeting, the investigation, the growing relationship between us, had been built on lies. You're David Allen? I whispered. Charlotte, I can explain. You lied to me about who you were? You let me believe Isabella's father was some stranger who abandoned me. I didn't know about Isabella, David, not Thomas, but David, said desperately. Charlotte, you have to believe me. When Elena contacted me and said you needed help investigating Vincent, I had no idea you had a daughter, let alone that she might be mine. Elena stepped forward with a folder full of documents. We have records showing that Charlotte and David had a relationship 2 years ago, right before David's company was acquired by Vincent. Charlotte became pregnant and never told David about the baby. Instead, she's been using Isabella as part of an elaborate revenge fantasy against Vincent. I stared at David, this man I'd fallen in love with, this man I'd trusted with my heart and my daughter's safety, and saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. You don't believe them, I said. David, you know me. You know Vincent is lying. I don't know what to believe anymore, David said. Charlotte, if Isabella is my daughter, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think her father was some stranger who abandoned you? Because I didn't know. I shouted, causing the crowd to step back. I never met you before that coffee shop. Vincent is manipulating everything. But even as I said it, I could see how it looked to everyone watching. The unstable woman having a breakdown, making increasingly wild claims, unable to keep her story straight. Vincent moved closer, and when he spoke, his voice was full of gentle concern that made me want to scream. Charlotte, I know you're confused and frightened, but Isabella needs stability. David needs time to process that he's a father. And you need professional help to work through the trauma that's clearly affecting your memory and judgment. I'm not confused. I said desperately. Vincent, you murdered our parents. You stole my inheritance. You've been planning this whole thing. The crowd murmured sympathetically, but I could see they thought they were watching a mental health crisis, not an exposure of the truth. Security is going to escort you somewhere safe, Vincent said. Somewhere you can get the help you need while we sort out custody arrangements for Isabella. Two large men in suits appeared on either side of me. Not hotel security, Vincent's private security, the kind of men who could make problems disappear permanently. David, I pleaded, reaching for him one last time. Please. You have to believe me. Everything Elena told you about me, everything Vincent is saying, it's all lies designed to isolate me. But David stepped back, his face full of confusion and hurt and doubt. In that moment, I realized Vincent's plan wasn't just to discredit me publicly. It was to destroy every relationship I'd built, every alliance I'd formed, every source of strength I'd found. He wanted me completely alone when he finished destroying me. Take her somewhere she can rest, Vincent told his security team. And make sure she gets the medical attention she needs. As they moved to take my arms, I had one moment of absolute clarity. Vincent hadn't just stolen my inheritance and killed my parents. He'd spent 3 years planning the complete annihilation of my identity, my relationships, my sanity, and my ability to fight back. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that the broken girl he'd thrown out 3 years ago was the same person standing in this ballroom tonight. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Vincent, I said, my voice cutting through the crowd's murmur with deadly calm. There's something you don't know about your perfect plan. He paused, intrigued despite himself. What's that, dear sister? I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd worn since walking into his trap. You should have killed me 3 years ago when you had the chance. Because the woman you're dealing with now isn't the girl you destroyed. And she's about to remind you why you were afraid of her potential in the first place. Vincent's satisfied expression flickered for just a moment, long enough for me to know that somewhere deep down, he was finally beginning to realize he might have underestimated his discarded little sister. But by then, it was going to be far too late for him to stop what was coming. Vincent's security team was reaching for my arms when my phone buzzed with a text message that changed everything. I glanced down and saw words that made my heart race with hope instead of terror. Package delivered. Game on. Maria. Sweet, loyal Maria who I'd thought had betrayed me for $50,000. Maria who'd been playing the longest game of all. Actually, Vincent, I said, stepping away from his security with a confidence that made the entire ballroom go quiet. Before your men escort me anywhere, I think these lovely people deserve to know the truth about tonight's charity gala. Charlotte, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Vincent said, but I caught the first flicker of uncertainty in his voice. Did everyone here know, I continued, projecting my voice across the room, that the Children's Cancer Research Foundation you're raising money for tonight doesn't actually exist? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vincent's face went carefully blank. The Charlotte Stark Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research, I continued, pulling out my phone. Named after Vincent's supposedly dead sister. Very touching. Except the IRS has no record of it, and the bank account collecting tonight's donations goes directly to Vincent's personal offshore accounts. That's a serious accusation, someone from the crowd called out. It's also completely false, Vincent said smoothly. Charlotte, in your current mental state. David, I interrupted, looking directly at the man I'd fallen in love with. Check your phone. Right now. David hesitated, then pulled out his phone. His face went white as he read whatever message had just arrived. What does it say? I asked. It's DNA results, David said slowly. But not for Isabella. It's DNA results proving that Vincent Stark and Charlotte Stark are not biological siblings. The crowd gasped. Vincent's composure finally cracked. That's impossible, he said. Actually, it's very possible when you consider that Vincent Stark died in a car accident with Robert and Catherine Stark 3 years ago, I said. The man standing before you is Vincent Brown, their adopted son who killed their biological children and stole their identities. Elena's face had gone sheet white. Charlotte, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Vincent Brown was adopted by my parents when he was 12 years old, after his own family died in a house fire, I continued. A house fire that was ruled arson, though the case was never solved. Maria stepped out from behind the crowd, carrying a box of documents that she placed on the nearest table. Elena thought she was so clever, feeding Vincent information about our investigation, Maria said, her voice carrying a Spanish accent I'd never heard before. But Elena forgot that old housekeepers know where all the family secrets are buried. Maria. Vincent snapped. You were paid to. I was paid to gain Charlotte's trust and report back to you, Maria interrupted. But what you didn't know is that I've been investigating you for 3 years, ever since you murdered the family I loved. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Vincent's security moved closer, but Maria held up a recording device. Everything Vincent has said tonight has been recorded, she announced. including his confession to me 15 minutes ago about how he arranged Robert and Catherine's car accident. She's lying, Vincent said desperately. This woman is clearly working with my sister to play the recording, David said suddenly, his voice cutting through Vincent's protests. Maria pressed play, and Vincent's voice filled the ballroom. Did you really think I'd let Charlotte destroy everything I worked for? I killed her parents to get this inheritance, and I'll kill her too if that's what it takes to keep it. The crowd went completely silent. Vincent Brown, I said, my voice steady and strong. You murdered Robert and Catherine Stark, stole their son's identity, and have been impersonating their heir for 3 years. You've defrauded investors, stolen from inventors, and tonight you tried to steal donations meant for cancer research. Vincent's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold killer underneath. You have no proof of any of this, he snarled. Actually, I have 3 years' worth of proof, I said. See, while you thought you were manipulating me, I was documenting every crime you've committed since my parents died. Every forged signature, every stolen patent, every fraudulent transaction. I pulled out a small device that looked like a simple USB drive. This contains copies of every financial record, every email, every piece of evidence needed to put you in prison for the rest of your life, I said. And before you think about destroying it, these files have already been uploaded to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the country. That's impossible, Elena said. I monitored all your communications. You monitored the communications I wanted you to see, I corrected. While you were feeding Vincent information about my fake investigation, Maria was helping me build a real case using resources Vincent never knew existed. David was staring at me with something that looked like amazement. Charlotte, how did you? Remember when you asked what I wanted to do after Vincent was destroyed? I said, meeting his eyes. I told you I wanted to build something that helps people. I've been building it for 3 years. I gestured to Maria, who pulled out another folder. The Charlotte Stark Foundation for Victim Advocacy, I announced. A real foundation, with real funding, designed to help people who've been victimized by corporate fraud. We've been working with the FBI's white-collar crime unit for 18 months, gathering evidence not just on Vincent, but on dozens of other predators like him. The crowd was mesmerized. Vincent looked like a cornered animal. You see, Vincent made a crucial error when he threw me away, I continued. He assumed I would focus on revenge instead of justice. He thought I would try to hurt him the same way he hurt me. Instead, I decided to make sure he could never hurt anyone again. Where's Isabella? David asked suddenly. I smiled. Isabella is safe with Judge Anderson, who has been working with the FBI as part of this investigation. Elena's claim that she's with Child Protective Services was just another lie. Elena was backing toward the exit, but Vincent's security had been quietly surrounded by men I now recognized as federal agents. Vincent Brown, one of the agents announced, you're under arrest for murder, fraud, identity theft, and about 40 other federal crimes. As the handcuffs clicked around Vincent's wrists, he looked at me with pure hatred. You think you've won? He hissed. You're still the same broken little girl I threw away. You'll never be anything more than. Vincent, I interrupted, my voice calm and final. I stopped being that broken little girl the moment I decided to save other people from becoming me. The empire you stole from my family is going to help victims like Sarah Chen, like David, like everyone else you've destroyed. David stepped closer to me, and I could see the confusion clearing from his eyes. Charlotte, I'm so sorry I doubted you, he said. When Elena showed me those DNA results claiming Isabella was mine. David, I said gently. Isabella is yours. That part wasn't a lie. His eyes widened. What? We did meet before, 2 years ago. You were David Allen then, not Thomas Anderson. You helped me when my car broke down outside your office building. We spent one night together talking about dreams and technology and changing the world. I smiled at the memory. You told me your name was David Thomas, and you were working on AI software that could revolutionize financial markets. Understanding dawned across his face. The night before Vincent approached me about selling my company. You disappeared the next day because Vincent threatened you, I continued. He said he'd destroy your family if you didn't sell to him immediately and cut all ties with anyone who might interfere with the deal. But why didn't you tell me Isabella was mine when we met at the coffee shop? Because I wasn't sure, I said honestly. Because you'd introduced yourself as Thomas Anderson, and you'd changed so much I wasn't certain you were the same David Thomas I'd spent that night with. And because I was terrified that if you were Isabella's father, Vincent might use that against all of us. David reached for my hands, and this time I didn't pull away. Charlotte, I remember that night. I remember thinking I'd met the most extraordinary woman, and hating myself for having to disappear without explanation. If I'd known about Isabella, You would have tried to protect us, and Vincent would have killed you too, I finished. David, everything that happened was designed to keep you and Isabella safe while I built the case that would destroy Vincent forever. As federal agents led Vincent and Elena away, the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement about witnessing the exposure of one of the decade's biggest fraud cases. So what happens now? David asked. I thought about Isabella, sleeping safely at Judge Anderson's house. I thought about the foundation I'd built to help Vincent's victims. I thought about the inheritance that would soon be returned to me, and how I planned to use it to change lives instead of just rebuilding my own. Now we go get our daughter, I said. And then we figure out what love looks like when it doesn't have to compete with the need for survival. David smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since this nightmare began. I'd like that very much, he said. But as we walked out of the ballroom together, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent's arrest was just the beginning of a much larger story. Because men like Vincent Brown don't build empires of fraud alone, and somewhere out there, his partners were watching tonight's events with very keen interest. Still, for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed, hope for a future built on love instead of survival, and the unshakable knowledge that the woman Vincent had tried to destroy was now powerful enough to protect everyone she cared about. 3 hours later, David and I stood outside Judge Anderson's Georgian mansion, waiting for the door to open and reunite me with Isabella. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing that Vincent could never hurt my daughter again. Judge Anderson opened the door with Isabella in her arms, my beautiful 2-year-old babbling happily and reaching for me the moment she saw my face. Mama! Isabella squealed, and I gathered her into my arms, breathing in that sweet baby smell and feeling like I could finally exhale after holding my breath for 3 years. Hello, sweetheart, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Mama's here. Mama's never going anywhere again. David stood beside me, staring at Isabella with wonder and something that looked like heartbreak. She's beautiful, Charlotte, he said softly. She looks just like you. Actually, Judge Anderson said, she looks quite a bit like you too, David. Those are definitely your eyes. Isabella chose that moment to reach for David with the fearless curiosity that only toddlers possess. He took her carefully, like she was made of spun glass, and when she patted his face with her tiny hands and said, Dada, in that questioning voice children use, I watched this brilliant, strong man completely fall apart with love. Hey there, Isabella, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you. Judge Anderson invited us inside, and as we sat in her elegant living room, Isabella playing contentedly between us while we processed everything that had happened, she filled us in on the details we'd missed. Vincent's been planning this public humiliation for months, she said. Elena approached me 3 weeks ago with what she claimed was evidence of Charlotte's mental instability. She said you'd kidnapped Isabella and were planning to hurt Vincent, and that she was working with him to get you the help you needed. But you didn't believe her? I asked. Judge Anderson smiled. My dear, I've been a family court judge for 30 years. I know the difference between mental illness and calculated revenge. More importantly, when Elena showed me the supposed evidence against you, I recognized Vincent's handiwork from the original estate proceedings. David looked up from where Isabella was showing him her favorite stuffed animal. What do you mean? Vincent forged documents to steal Charlotte's inheritance 3 years ago, Judge Anderson explained. The same sophisticated forgery techniques, the same legal language patterns, the same arrogant assumption that no one would look closely enough to spot the deception. So you've known all along that Vincent was lying? I asked. I've suspected for years that something was wrong with your parents' estate settlement, she said. But suspicion isn't proof, and Vincent had covered his tracks well. When Elena came to me with her story about your mental breakdown, I realized this might be my chance to finally expose him. You were working with the FBI too, David said, understanding. I've been feeding information to Agent Martinez for 18 months, Judge Anderson confirmed. Tonight was the culmination of a federal investigation that started when Maria contacted authorities about Vincent's true identity. Isabella had climbed into my lap and was falling asleep against my chest, exhausted by the evening's excitement. Holding her while surrounded by people who had risked everything to protect us, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my parents died, the security of being part of a family. There's something else you need to know, Judge Anderson said, her expression growing serious. Vincent's arrest tonight was just the beginning. The FBI has been tracking a network of corporate criminals who've been working together to manipulate estate proceedings, steal intellectual property, and eliminate obstacles to their schemes. How big is this network? David asked. 43 individuals across 12 states, she replied. Vincent was one of the primary organizers, but there are others who've been using his methods to destroy families and steal inheritances. Tonight's evidence is going to bring down the entire operation. I thought about Sarah Chen and all the other victims whose lives Vincent had shattered, and felt a fierce satisfaction that justice would finally reach beyond just my own case. What happens to Vincent now? I asked. He's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole, Judge Anderson said. Murder, identity theft, fraud, racketeering, the charges are extensive. Elena will likely serve 15 to 20 years as his accomplice. David was quiet for a long moment, stroking Isabella's hair as she slept. Charlotte, he said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. That night we spent together 2 years ago, did you know who I was when you approached Elena about the investigation? I met his eyes, knowing this was the moment when we either built something real together or let Vincent's lies destroy us forever. I suspected, I said honestly. When Elena mentioned she'd found an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate fraud, I asked her to tell me about his background. When she said he was the son of Judge Anderson and had been investigating Vincent for personal reasons, I started wondering if you might be the David Thomas I'd met that night. But you weren't sure? I wasn't sure until I saw how you interacted with Isabella, I continued. You had the same gentleness, the same way of seeing potential in everything around you. And when you talked about technology changing the world, you used the exact same phrases you'd used that night. David was quiet, processing this. Are you angry that I didn't tell you immediately? I asked. No, he said, surprising me. Charlotte, you were protecting Isabella from a man who'd already murdered 2 people. If I'd known she was my daughter, I would have insisted on being part of her life, which would have put all 3 of us in danger. And now? David shifted Isabella gently so he could reach for my hand. Now I want to be part of both your lives, he said. Not because of obligation or guilt, but because tonight I realized something important. What's that? I was falling in love with you before I knew about Isabella, he said. Everything I felt in that coffee shop, every moment we spent building the case against Vincent, every conversation that made me believe in hope again, that was real. Isabella didn't create those feelings, she just made me realize how much I have to lose if I don't fight for what we could be together. Judge Anderson cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps I should give you 2 some privacy to discuss your future. Actually, I said, an idea forming. Judge Anderson, would you be willing to officiate a custody hearing to establish David's parental rights? Not because I don't trust him, I added quickly, but because I want everything legal and official so no one can ever question Isabella's security again. I'd be honored, she said. And Charlotte, there's something else. With Vincent's conviction, your parents' original will become enforceable again. You're about to inherit the Stark fortune, all of it. The magnitude of that hit me suddenly. Not just the money, though that would be life-changing, but the justice. My parents' final wishes would finally be honored. Vincent's theft would be completely undone. How much are we talking about? David asked. Approximately $2.4 billion, Judge Anderson said. Plus the family businesses, the real estate holdings, and all the assets Vincent acquired using stolen funds. I stared at her, trying to process numbers that large. 2 years ago, I'd been cleaning offices for minimum wage and sleeping on Maria's couch. Now I was about to become one of the wealthiest women in the country. Charlotte, David said gently. Are you okay? I'm thinking about what my parents would want me to do with that money, I said. They built their fortune by helping people, by creating jobs and opportunities. Vincent used it to destroy lives. What do you want to do with it? Judge Anderson asked. I looked down at Isabella, sleeping peacefully in my arms, trusting that the adults in her life would keep her safe and loved. I thought about Sarah Chen and all the other inventors whose dreams had been stolen. I thought about families who would lose everything because men like Vincent saw other people's desperation as opportunity. I want to build something that makes sure no one else has to go through what we went through, I said. A foundation that helps victims of corporate fraud, but also an early warning system that identifies and stops predators before they can destroy lives. That's going to take a lot of resources, David said. Good thing I'm about to inherit $2.4 billion, I replied, and for the first time in 3 years, I laughed with pure joy instead of bitter irony. David grinned, and I could see the same vision forming in his mind. We could use AI technology to track financial patterns that indicate fraud, he said. Create a database that helps small inventors and business owners protect themselves from manipulation. We could fund legal representation for victims who can't afford to fight back, I added. We could lobby for stronger laws protecting intellectual property rights. Judge Anderson was smiling. You two are going to change the world, aren't you? I looked at David, this man who'd risked everything to seek justice for people he'd never met, who'd fallen in love with a woman carrying enough baggage to sink most relationships, who was looking at our sleeping daughter like she was the most precious thing in the universe. "We're going to try," I said. Later that night, as we drove home through the quiet city streets with Isabella secured in her car seat, David reached over and took my hand. "Charlotte, can I tell you something?" "Always." 3 years ago, when Vincent forced me to sell my company and disappear, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never get the chance to build something meaningful again, never meet someone who understood what I was trying to accomplish. And now? "Now I realize Vincent actually gave me the greatest gift possible," David said. "He brought me back to you. And tomorrow, we're going to start building something together that's going to help thousands of people reclaim their lives." I squeezed his hand, looking ahead at the road that would take us home to begin our new life together. "David? Yes? I love you. Not because you're Isabella's father, not because we're both Vincent's victims, but because you're the kind of man who sees injustice and can't rest until he fixes it." "I love you too," he said. "And Charlotte?" Vincent was wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. "What's that?" "You were never the broken little girl he threw away," David said. "You were always the woman who was going to save everyone else from becoming broken too." As we pulled into the driveway of what would soon be our home, Isabella stirred in her car seat and smiled in her sleep, safe and loved and completely unaware that her parents had just finished rewriting their family's entire future. Tomorrow, we would start the work of building something beautiful from the ruins Vincent had tried to leave behind. Tonight, we were simply a family, finally whole, finally free, finally ready to discover what love looked like when it didn't have to compete with the need for survival. But first, there was one more surprise waiting for us, one that would prove that sometimes, the best victories are the ones that heal old wounds we didn't even know still needed healing. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated lobby of what was once Vincent's corporate headquarters, now transformed into the Charlotte Stark Foundation for Justice and Innovation. The marble floors that had once echoed with the footsteps of Vincent's victims now welcomed inventors, small business owners, and families seeking protection from corporate predators. Isabella toddled between the desks where our team worked, her infectious laughter filling spaces that had once been cold with Vincent's calculated cruelty. At 2.5, she was already showing signs of the brilliant mind she'd inherited from both her parents, building elaborate structures with blocks and asking questions that made our software engineers stop and think. "Mama, look," Isabella called out, pointing to the large screen displaying our foundation's impact dashboard. "Numbers." "Very good, sweetheart," I said, scooping her up for a hug. "Those numbers represent families we've helped, just like Daddy helped us." David emerged from the conference room where he'd been meeting with our legal team, his face bright with excitement. "Charlotte, you're not going to believe this," he said, moving toward us with that familiar energy that always meant he'd discovered something amazing. "We just got confirmation that our early warning system prevented another Vincent-style fraud. A tech startup in Seattle received an offer that looked too good to be true, ran it through our database, and discovered the investor was using Vincent's exact playbook." I felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with knowing our work was making a real difference. "How much did we save them from losing?" I asked. "Their entire company. The technology they've developed could revolutionize renewable energy. Vincent's network was planning to steal it for pennies and sell it to oil companies who would bury the patents." Isabella clapped her hands, not understanding the details but sensing our excitement. Over the past 6 months, she'd become our foundation's unofficial mascot, reminding everyone who worked here exactly why we fought so hard to protect families from predators. "Speaking of protection," David said, producing an envelope from his jacket pocket, "we got some news today that I think you'll want to hear." "What kind of news?" "The kind that ties up one last loose end from your past." I settled into one of the comfortable chairs we'd installed in our lobby, a far cry from the intimidating furniture Vincent had preferred, and opened the envelope while Isabella played with David's watch. Inside was a letter from the federal prosecutor handling Vincent's case, along with several photographs that made my breath catch in my throat. "David," I whispered, staring at the images. "Is this real?" The photographs showed Vincent in his prison uniform, but he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him in the visitation room was Maria, our Maria, who'd risked everything to help us expose his crimes. "Maria's been visiting him every week since his conviction," David explained. "Not to support him, but to help federal investigators uncover the full extent of his criminal network." I read the letter with growing amazement. Vincent, faced with life in prison and the complete destruction of everything he'd built through fraud, had finally started talking. He'd given investigators information that led to the arrest of 43 other criminals across 12 states. More importantly, he'd revealed the location of assets he'd hidden, money stolen from hundreds of victims over the years. Charlotte, David said gently, Vincent wants to see you. I looked up from the letter, startled. He what? He's asking for a meeting. No cameras, no lawyers, just the two of you. The warden says he's been asking for months, but they wanted to wait until the investigation was complete. Why would he want to see me? David was quiet for a moment, then sat beside me, taking Isabella onto his lap. The prosecutor thinks Vincent is dying, he said carefully. Prison hasn't been kind to him. He's lost 60 pounds, his hair has gone completely gray, and the prison doctor says he's showing signs of severe depression and anxiety. They think he wants to make peace, maybe. Or try to. I stared at the letter, trying to process the idea of seeing Vincent again, not as the terrifying figure who'd haunted my nightmares, but as a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. Do you think I should go? I asked. I think, David said carefully, that might be a decision only you can make. But Charlotte, you're not the same person he destroyed 3 years ago. If you decide to see him, it would be from a position of strength, not vulnerability. Isabella looked up at me with those wise eyes that seemed to understand more than a toddler should. Mama strong, she said clearly, patting my hand. I laughed despite the weight of the decision before me. Yes, baby. Mama's very strong now. That evening, after Isabella was asleep in the nursery we'd created in our penthouse apartment, the same building where I'd once been homeless, now transformed into a home filled with love and laughter, David and I sat on our balcony overlooking the city. I've decided to see him, I said, watching the lights twinkle below us. Not for Vincent, but for me. I need to close that chapter completely. David nodded, unsurprised. I'll drive you. You don't have to. Charlotte, he interrupted, taking my hand. We're partners in everything now. That includes facing the ghosts from our past. 3 days later, we drove to the federal penitentiary where Vincent was serving his sentence. The irony wasn't lost on me. The last time I'd seen my brother, I'd been powerless, pregnant, and begging for mercy. Now I was arriving in a car that cost more than most people's houses, wearing a dress that had been featured in Forbes magazine alongside an article about my foundation's revolutionary approach to corporate fraud prevention. The prison was exactly what I'd expected: concrete walls, barbed wire, the institutional smell of disinfectant and despair. But as we went through the security procedures, I felt none of the fear I'd anticipated. Vincent couldn't hurt me anymore. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. The visitation room was stark and depressing, designed to remind everyone exactly what happened to people who chose crime over community. I sat at the metal table, waiting, wondering what I would say to the man who'd murdered my parents and stolen my inheritance. Then Vincent walked in, and my breath caught. David had been right, prison had not been kind to him. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms and intimidated CEOs was now gaunt, gray, and broken. His expensive suits had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his diminished frame. Most shocking of all, his eyes, once cold and calculating, now held something I'd never seen before. Regret. Charlotte, he said, sitting across from me with the careful movements of someone much older than his 35 years. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I said honestly. We sat in silence for a long moment, two people who'd shared a childhood but had become strangers, separated by choices that could never be undone. You look? Vincent struggled for words. You look happy. Successful. Like the woman Mom and Dad always said you'd become. Don't, I said sharply. Don't talk about our parents as if you have the right to their memory. Vincent flinched but nodded. You're right. I forfeited that right when I killed them. The blunt admission hung between us. No denials, no justifications, no attempts to minimize what he'd done. Why did you want to see me, Vincent? I asked. Because, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I wanted to tell you something I should have said 3 years ago. You were never the problem, Charlotte. I was. I waited, saying nothing. I spent our entire childhood hating you for being everything I wasn't, Vincent continued. Kind, genuine, effortlessly lovable. I told myself you were stealing the attention and affection that belonged to me, but the truth was simpler and uglier. What truth? I was jealous of your ability to make people happy, he said. Mom and Dad loved you because you brought joy into their lives. People gravitated toward you because you made them feel valuable and seen. I never learned how to do that. I only knew how to perform, to manipulate, to take what I wanted. Vincent stared at his hands, and I could see tears threatening to fall. When they died and I had the power to take everything, I thought I was finally getting justice. But justice for what? For being born without your natural warmth? For never learning how to earn love instead of demanding it? Vincent. No, let me finish, he said desperately. I need to say this while I still can. The night I kicked you out, when you were pregnant and grieving, I felt powerful for about 10 minutes. Then I spent the next 3 years watching everything I'd stolen turn to ash in my hands. What do you mean? The money meant nothing because I'd earned none of it. The business meant nothing because I had no one to share success with. The respect and admiration meant nothing because it was all based on lies. I had everything I thought I wanted, and it felt like nothing at all. Vincent looked up at me, and I could see the man he might have been if he'd chosen differently. When I saw you at that gala, standing there strong and beautiful and unbroken, I realized what I'd actually lost when I destroyed our family. It wasn't the inheritance or the business or even our parents' love. I'd lost the chance to be proud of who my sister had become. I felt tears starting in my own eyes, not for Vincent, but for the family we might have been. I can't forgive you, I said quietly. Not for murdering our parents, not for what you put me through, not for all the other families you've destroyed. I know, Vincent said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for something else. What? Promise me that Isabella will never know this part of our family story, he said. Not the details, anyway. Let her grow up knowing she comes from people who built things, who helped others, who made the world better. Don't let my choices poison her understanding of who she could become. I thought about Isabella, already so bright and curious and full of the same natural kindness that had defined our parents. Isabella will know she comes from survivors, I said finally. She'll know her family fought for justice and won. She'll know that sometimes people make terrible choices, but that doesn't define what's possible for the people who love them. Vincent smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since we were children. That's perfect, he said. Thank you. Vincent, why are you helping the FBI? I asked. Why give them information about your criminal network? Because, he said, I can't undo the damage I've caused, but maybe I can prevent other families from being destroyed the way I destroyed ours. It's not redemption, nothing I do can earn that. But maybe it's a start toward making sure my legacy isn't purely destructive. The guard announced that our time was up. As Vincent stood to leave, he paused. Charlotte? I know I have no right to ask this, but would you tell me about her? About Isabella? I considered the request, then decided that even Vincent deserved to know something beautiful had come from the family he'd tried to destroy. She's brilliant, I said. She builds elaborate structures and asks questions that make adults think. She's kind to everyone she meets, just like our parents were. And she's going to grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally by people who would do anything to protect her happiness. She sounds perfect, Vincent said, tears finally falling. Like her mother. As Vincent was led away, I sat in that sterile visitation room feeling something I hadn't expected, closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the complete absence of the hatred that had driven me for 3 years. Vincent had become exactly what he'd always been afraid of being, irrelevant to my happiness. David was waiting for me in the parking lot, and when I emerged from the prison, he searched my face carefully. How do you feel? He asked. Free, I said, surprised by the truth of it. Completely free. That evening, we had dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same small Italian place where David had first asked me about my dreams for the future. Isabella sat in her high chair between us, charming the waitstaff with her bright smile and impressive vocabulary. Mama, Dada, family, she announced proudly, pointing to each of us in turn. That's right, sweetheart, David said, reaching across the table to take my hand. We're a family. David, I said, watching Isabella work seriously on her pasta, I've been thinking about our future. What about it? The foundation is thriving, Isabella is happy and healthy, Vincent can never hurt anyone again, I listed. We've accomplished everything we set out to do. And? I smiled, feeling that familiar flutter of possibility that had sustained me through the darkest times. And I think it's time to start building something new. Not for justice or survival or protection, but just for joy. David's eyes lit up with understanding. What did you have in mind? Marriage, I said simply. A real wedding with all our friends, Isabella in a flower girl dress, and a celebration of everything we've overcome together. Charlotte Stark, David said, standing up right there in the restaurant and pulling out a ring box I hadn't seen him carrying. Will you marry me? The entire restaurant went quiet, watching as this man I'd fallen in love with while planning corporate warfare knelt beside my chair with tears in his eyes and hope in his voice. David Allen, I said, my own voice thick with emotion, yes. Absolutely yes. Isabella clapped her hands and shouted, yay, as the restaurant erupted in applause. David slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple but stunning design that somehow perfectly captured both the elegance I'd inherited from my family and the strength I'd built myself. When? He asked, sitting back down but not letting go of my hand. Soon, I said. I've spent 3 years planning Vincent's downfall. I want to spend the next 3 months planning our beginning. As we drove home that night, Isabella asleep in her car seat and my engagement ring catching the light from passing street lamps, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From that terrifying night when Vincent threw me out, through the years of struggle and planning, to this perfect evening when the future stretched ahead of us filled with nothing but possibility. "David?" I said as we pulled into our driveway. "Yeah? Do you think our parents would be proud of us? Of what we built together?" David was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think," he said finally, "they would be amazed that love this strong could grow from circumstances this difficult. I think they would be proud that 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, David and I were married in the garden of the home my parents had built, the same house Vincent had thrown me out of, now transformed into a place of love and celebration." Isabella toddled down the aisle ahead of me in a pale pink dress, dropping flower petals with the serious concentration of a child given an important job. Maria walked me down the aisle, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she placed my hand in David's. Judge Anderson officiated the ceremony, speaking about love that grows stronger through adversity and families that choose each other as much as they're born to each other. As David and I exchanged vows in front of our foundation team, the families we'd helped, and the friends who'd become our chosen family, I felt the presence of my parents like a warm blessing on everything we'd built. "Charlotte," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, "you taught me that surviving tragedy isn't about becoming harder, it's about becoming stronger. You showed me that love isn't something we earn, it's something we choose to give freely. You're my partner, my best friend, and the mother of our brilliant daughter, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how treasured you are." "David," I replied, looking into the eyes of the man who'd helped me transform pain into purpose, "you came into my life when I was planning destruction and taught me how to build instead. You loved me when I was broken, supported me when I was fighting, and celebrated with me when I won. You're my partner in justice and my partner in joy, and I promise to love you exactly as fiercely as we fought for each other." When Judge Anderson pronounced us husband and wife, and David kissed me in front of our entire chosen family, Isabella clapped and shouted, "Mama! Dada! Married," with such enthusiasm that our guests couldn't stop laughing. Later, during the reception in the same ballroom where Vincent had tried to destroy me, I stood with David watching our friends celebrate, our daughter dancing with Maria to music that filled the space with warmth instead of cold calculation. "Any regrets?" David asked, pulling me closer as we swayed to the music. I thought about Vincent, serving his life sentence while we celebrated our new beginning. I thought about the family sleeping safely tonight because our foundation had protected them from predators. I thought about Isabella, growing up surrounded by love and possibility. "Just one," I said. "What's that?" "I wish it hadn't taken tragedy to bring us together," I said. "But then again, maybe we needed to become who we are before we could build what we have." David spun me around, and when I came back to his arms, I was laughing with pure joy. "Charlotte Allen," he said, using my married name for the first time. "I love the sound of that," I said. "Get used to it," he replied. "You're stuck with me forever now." As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, Isabella fell asleep in my arms, exhausted from a day of being the center of attention. David and I sat in the garden where we'd exchanged vows, surrounded by flowers my parents had planted years ago, watching the stars emerge over the city we'd learned to call home. "What are you thinking about?" David asked. "The future," I said. "Our daughter's future, specifically. What kind of world are we building for her?" "A world where people like Vincent can't destroy families," David said. "A world where innovation is protected, where justice is accessible, where love wins more often than hate. A world where little girls who lose their parents don't have to spend years fighting just to survive," I added. "A world where brilliant inventors don't have to choose between helping their families and protecting their life's work. A world where Isabella Ale grows up knowing she's capable of changing everything, just by being brave enough to choose kindness over cruelty." David kissed my forehead, then leaned down to kiss Isabella's sleeping cheek. "I love our world," he said simply. "And you know what, beautiful souls? I hope you love our story too. Because here's what I learned through all of this, and I want you to really think about this question: what did you learn from this story? Was it that justice delayed isn't always justice denied? That love can grow even in the hardest soil? That families aren't just born, they're built by people who choose to protect each other? Drop me a comment and let me know, what's your brutal, honest opinion about this story? Did it make you think differently about forgiveness, about justice, about the power we all have to rebuild our lives after someone tries to destroy them? And can I tell you something? I'm curious about your experience watching this. Do you like the voice I'm using to tell these stories? Because your feedback matters to me more than you know. This channel exists because people like you want to hear stories about triumph over tragedy, love over hate, hope over despair. If this story moved you, if it made you believe that even the most impossible circumstances can lead to beautiful endings, please hit that subscribe button. Because I have so many more stories to tell you, stories about people who refuse to let their worst moments define their entire lives. 5 years later, as I write this final chapter, David and I have helped over 10,000 families protect themselves from corporate fraud. Isabella is 7 years old and already showing signs of inheriting both her parents' passion for justice and her grandparents' gift for bringing out the best in people. She knows she had an uncle who made bad choices, but she also knows she comes from people who never stopped fighting for what was right. Vincent died in prison 2 years ago. The letter the warden sent me said he'd spent his final months teaching other inmates to read and helping them write letters to the families they'd hurt. It wasn't redemption, but maybe it was the closest thing to peace a man like him could find. Our foundation now operates in 37 states. David's early warning system has prevented over 600 fraudulent schemes. And every morning, I wake up in the home my parents built, surrounded by the family we chose, doing work that makes the world safer for families like ours. Sometimes the best revenge really is living so well that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant to your happiness. Sometimes justice looks like building something beautiful from the ashes of what was stolen. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply teaching your daughter that love always, always wins in the end. Thank you for taking this journey with me, beautiful souls. Thank you for believing that broken people can become whole, that stolen things can be reclaimed, and that families can be rebuilt stronger than they ever were before. Now go build something beautiful with your one precious life. And don't forget to subscribe, because the best stories are the ones that remind us all what's possible when we refuse to let our worst moments have the final word. With love and endless possibility.